All right, what's up, guys? It's me, Professor Wright, over at Eastern New Mexico University, here to do another demonstration for you guys. This demo is basically how to trim a piece that you have created or left enough clay that you might want to carve away and clean up this bottom, and then not only just trim in general, but create a foot ring, right? Trimming to leave a foot ring. This video is a follow-up to another video I did on how to form bowls and shapes that you might want to put a foot ring on later. And yeah, this is the piece from that. So I'm going to demonstrate how to trim on this. This is really kind of, I would call it the traditional potter's approach to trimming. I mean, there's nuances and things that change between different makers, but for the most part, this is how, I was taught that most potters, at least studio potters, would manage this process. And studio potter being, someone who's sort of like an artist working at home, not a production potter. So anyway, yeah, I know the angle on this one is fairly extreme. I wanted to be sure that you guys could see more of the bottom and be sort of looking down as I trim. I thought that might be a little bit better vantage point than some of the other videos, but it does mean for a lot of this video I'll be off screen. So yeah, we need to be sure we're still on that. Yeah, good angle. So yeah, in any case, yeah, here, this is the piece that I made in the other video, and I did a drawing in the other video to sort of display for you how to be sure you leave enough clay for trimming a foot ring. I talked about leaving the bottom a little bit thicker right here, and then the ankles, right, the place where the walls meet the floor, leaving that a little bit thicker, so it's thick at the bottom and then tapers out to the rim. And then really what this video is how to get rid of that extra clay that you've left in the bottom and the ankles. And what you can see here is, since the last video, I took a red Sharpie to demonstrate and kind of show you the areas of clay that we're going to be pretty much removing, right? It may not be exactly the shape, but for the most part, this is, yeah, kind of the idea of trimming when you're going to do a foot ring, is to cut away that excess clay that you've left at the ankles and then remove the foot ring. Now, a lot of people, they have various approaches to the foot ring. Some people do really shallow foot rings, or maybe they don't even really leave a foot ring. They just mainly focus their trimming on getting rid of this excess clay that they left at the bottom, that was left there in order to accommodate the nice like belly or outward projecting shape. Yeah, and then it's easy when you're leather hard to sort of flip it over and remove that, and it'll still support itself. But basically, this whole process, just to remind you what this is all about, let me grab some of my examples. The reason that you trim, for the most part, is, as I said, to get rid of that excess clay down here at the ankles that was meant to support the walls as they projected outwards. I hope I'm not holding this too close to me and you guys can see well. But it's not only that, but it's also to remove this clay at the bottom, which, like I said, foot rings are not always mandatory. For the most part, as I make wider pieces, the wider and wider it is, like you get into plates and platters, I always think it's a good idea to trim a foot ring. Less in this case for getting rid of excess clay, but more so because things tend to sit a little bit flatter and nicer if they're very wide and flat, if you have a ring that supports them rather than just a nice flat bottom. A really like wide flat bottom tends to be more likely to warp, and it is yeah, just not going to sit on the table as well as if you do a foot ring. Now, that's not to say every foot ring is going to sit perfectly flat if the piece warps in a firing or what have you during the drying process. But for the most part, yeah, it's less like, and also, it's not going to scratch up your countertops as much and all that sort of stuff. That's what my dad always tells me anyway. But yeah, so yeah, he likes the foot rings on pieces that I give him. But yeah, anyway, approaching this, they don't always have to be this deep. They can be pretty shallow. Here's an example of one of mine that's cut pretty deep. Here's another one that I cut that I also added little like drain holes. If you put this in the dishwasher, this won't fill up with water, it'll drain, and also just kind of looks cool when it sits on the table. Still a pretty deep one, with kind of my like typical approach of the dimples and kind of the spiral in the bottom, all this sort of stuff. This is just an example of mine, but it doesn't always have to be that deep. Like I said, this one's still kind of deep, but it's a little less angular. This is by one of my favorite potters, Linda Christensen. This is just a cup with a foot ring, which is also an option for you. You could even add a handle after this and stuff like that. But, there's nothing that says you can't add a handle to this. But you also don't have to do this on every piece. It's sort of your call, various reasons that I've already described. But yeah, here's hers, a little more like curvaceous inside and not quite as deep. A lot of kind of like store mass-produced pots that you might buy just really aren't going to have a super deep foot ring either. But yeah, anyway, those are just sort of some descriptions and reasons for putting a foot ring on a piece. Again, mainly it's to get rid of some of this clay, and then also, you know, the wider the piece is, the more flat it's going to sit if you trim it. But let's get into how we're going to do this. So I'm going to move some stuff around and knock my Sharpie off the stool. So when we approach trimming in this way, we basically, all we're doing is we're taking a piece that has gotten to leather hard, which is that stage between dry and wet, and we've decided, you know, it's firm enough that if we flip this over and set it on the wheel and we recenter it, that we can carve away at it. Now, there are people that might just do this whole process by hand on sort of a banding wheel. They can like literally cut and shape this, just sort of shave away clay. That is not really the approach I'm showing you here, but there are other places you can go. One of my favorite videos for a demonstration of how to sort of hand cut a foot is a video of Lisa Hammond from Goldmark Art. It's not really a video of how to do it, but in her documentary video at Goldmark Art, she does, for the first few minutes of her like kind of bio video, she is hand carving some feet into some cups, and it's a cool different sort of approach to see. Even if she's not teaching it, you know, you can watch her do that, and that is an option. And just remember, you know, that's always an option out there for you. But again, for this kind of traditional approach, that's what I'm here to show you. And there's lots of videos of how to do this out there. But in any case, yeah, what we're really going to do is just take this piece, flip it over, like I said, and then find the center again, and then carve away with this secured down to the bat. But how do we do all that? So we're going to take your piece. One of the first things I recommend you do before you set this down is just take a minute to sort of feel the piece and get a feel for how thick the proportions are that you left after you finish throwing it. And then, yeah, get it ready, set it on its rim. Try to be sure there's not any crud on your bat or crud on the rim that's going to possibly mar it up later. It's going to get a little bit kind of like flattened or sanded or something, or, you know, just sort of pressed down on the rim, but that is okay. I try to have a dry bat. There are other approaches, and I'll talk more about these in a minute, that, you know, use a wet bat for trimming and all that sort of stuff. But for me, I like to start dry. And then one of the first things we have to do that's always the trickiest when learning to trim is to recenter the piece, okay? So this is really the longest part of my demo after this description that I've gone into, is how to recenter this. So my first way of teaching beginners to center is very reliable, but very tedious, okay? So the big thing to do is set this down on your bat. Sometimes you can use a bat, or you can even trim just on a wheel head that doesn't have a bat on it. You have to watch out for the bat pins, but what's nice is you have the concentric circles on the wheel head that can help you sort of find the center. Sorry, I'm trying to think here how to say this. Yeah, but you don't always have that. And either way, you're still not going to be perfect. So what you have to do is set it as close as you can to center, and then start spinning your wheel very, very slowly. It helps if it's on. Let me get it going. Okay, very slowly. And then while it's spinning, what you need to do is find something sharp. You can use a needle tool, or a lot of times I just use my thumbnail if it's long enough. Here, I'm going to demonstrate with the needle tool. What you're going to do is just very slowly move the needle tool towards your piece and get it close enough that it starts to make a mark, right? And as soon as it makes a mark, you stop moving your needle tool, okay? And as it's making a mark, oh, and I do usually say make the mark down here at the ankle. Some people approach it by making a mark here and then trying to find, you know, a way that's like perfectly in the middle and center and all sorts of stuff. I don't like that because it's sort of dizzying. I really like the approach where you make the mark here on the side. And again, whatever sharp tool allows you to do that. It's a very shallow mark. Yeah, that again, as soon as it touches, you stop moving. And then what you'll see is, I hope you can see it in the video, there's a mark here where the needle touched, but it only kind of goes like from here to here, which means the needle wasn't touching anywhere on this side. So this area where the needle marked is out of center, right? It is pushed against it. So what I need to do is find kind of the middle of that mark that was made by my needle and just move the piece kind of in the opposite direction, across from the mark that was made. So I'm going to do that very, very lightly, right? I'm not doing a lot. Then I have to get rid of that mark that was made. By the way, this pot is kind of on the firm side of leather hard. You can even trim stuff bone dry. I don't recommend it. It's not great for your lungs or your ears, in my personal opinion. But you know, you can work with trimming a little bit more dry than you might add a handle or something like that. But you want to keep in mind, if you're trying to add something after trimming, that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can also work in a softer stage as well, right? There's a lot more kind of breadth and margin for error in terms of when you can trim. But in any case, yeah, so I'm just gonna do this again. You know, after I've found that mark, kind of moved it, I need to kind of try it again. I just set this where I'm gonna move the needle very, very slowly towards the piece. As soon as I start touching, I stop the wheel. Okay, or I stop the needle tool moving, let it make the mark, and then I'm gonna stop. Now I'm gonna look at the mark that was made again. It starts about here. It goes much further this time, almost all the way around the pot, about 2/3 of the way around it, which means I'm almost to center. But again, I'm gonna find the middle of that mark that was made, which be about right here, and I'm gonna move it, and I'm gonna move it, I mean, just ever so slightly. I mean, very, very little at this point, because it is almost in center. And I'm gonna get rid of that mark and test it again, okay? All right. Find a part of the pot that is really nice and smooth. You don't want to be trying to measure this on a real lumpy part of the pot, because that's going to give you kind of a false measurement. And again, since the mark is so shallow, it shouldn't really matter. Okay, look at that. Okay, so I barely touched the pot, and now the needle is making a mark all the way around. And what that means is that this piece is perfectly in the center, right? So I am done, and I'm ready to secure this piece down. I made the cardinal mistake of not preparing the clay that I need to secure this down. So give me 2 seconds, I will be right back. Okay, that was sort of silly, and I hope I don't have to reshoot this whole take because of it. So in any case, the method that I'm going to show you in terms of how to, once you have your piece secured in the center of your bat, the way that I'm going to teach you how to secure it here so that while you're trimming it doesn't slide around is just using some more clay, right? You're going to make little lugs of clay that hold this down in place. I'll get to that in a minute, but before I get to that, I want to talk about the fact that, okay, so that method I just taught you for centering, like I said, is pretty tedious, but very, very reliable. This piece is dead center, I can promise you that. But there is a much simpler, albeit a little more tricky, way to approach centering your piece, and it's called slap to center, okay? And I see people all the time, like kind of unwilling, or they don't want to teach their beginners how to do slap to center because they think maybe it's like too complex or too advanced of a move. Beginners see it and they think it's really complex. But I personally think it's actually best to teach beginners because, in my opinion, hot take here, it takes as little thinking as you can muster to get something to slap to center, okay? So let's get into that. Slap to center, let me show you what it looks like. So I'll set my piece here, right? I get it as close as I can, and then all I've got to do is slap the pot until it makes itself centered in the middle of the pot, or in the middle of the bat, right? So there you go, that's how I did that. That's what it looks like from the outside, right? And it's, again, it seems like one of those real tricky, takes years to learn sort of maneuvers that ceramics is full of. But I personally find, again, the trick to this is not thinking too much. And I like to teach my beginners this because honestly, it's so quick and so many parts of the process of trimming can be sort of tedious and you have to restart and all this sort of stuff. It's so nice to know a quick way to center your piece. Okay, so yeah, now, because like I said, if you just spent like 5 minutes doing that needle tool centering method, right, and you get it, it's all perfect, and then right away, as soon as you go to trim it, it peels up or slides off center, you're going to be really irritated that you have to spend another 5 minutes using the needle, getting it centered again, all that sort of stuff. You can honestly just recenter in a few seconds if you use the slap method. So let me teach you how I teach beginners how to do the slap method. So what I say is you set your pot down and you're going to go very slow while doing this, and your left hand is here as what I call the catcher's mitt. It is just here in case something goes off. It's to help you catch it because, you know, you're slapping very, very lightly, but if you slap too hard, it might kind of take lift and try to fly off the bat, and it just helps if your left hand is here to catch it. So with your right hand, you're going to do the slapping. And as I said, I see people all the time try to, whoa, I just realized my bat's not even secure. That's awesome. I've been working this whole time with it. Okay, let me go ahead. I wondered, it looked a little off. Boom. Okay, that's funny. Another weird outtake. But in any case, yeah. So forward slap to center. We get it going. Left hand here is the catcher's mitt. And I'm just going to like lightly tap the side of my pot, okay? And one thing you're gonna notice, okay, so a lot of people, they get real caught up when they're learning to tap to center in finding that spot that it's off center, and they think they have to hit it in this perfect place, right? Or they have to think they have to get like a perfect timing or something like that. I've watched like some potters who I won't mention by name create like 45-minute tutorials on timing and finding the perfect spot to hit and all sorts of stuff. And honestly, it's all sort of silly. It's just a way to get you to look at their channel for 45 minutes. Personally, again, think as little as possible. What you want to do, you don't want to try to hit, see how, like I said, some people will try to hit that part of it that's out of sync. You're just going to hit totally random, right? The whole point of this, the hitting, is to just knock it slightly off of the bat so that centrifugal force sort of whips it to the center of your bat. And if you're always trying to find the perfect time, you're just not going to find it. So the best thing is to hit randomly as possible. Don't try to find a rhythm. Don't do any of that sort of stuff. Just slap it until boom, you've got your piece in the middle. And you can tell it's in the middle because when I set my left hand here, my index and forefinger are on it, you know, it's not going anywhere. I'm not twisting it or sliding it around with that. It's just sliding perfectly through my hands. That means it's center, and I can do this all day. It takes a few seconds, right? You're not slapping very hard, no rhythm, no perfect spot to slap it. You just kind of knock it so that it sort of slides into center as it's spinning. Again, over and over, I can do this, right? No thought to the process. Turn your brain off, just hit it randomly, boom, every time. Now, one thing you want to start thinking about, and this is true of both methods for centering, if your rim is not perfectly centered, it's not going to look centered, right? You're going to have to kind of ignore that, okay? And you're not going to use that for the needle, like marking or anything like this. You're not going to mark it down on the rim, right? If your rim is off center, what you need to do is basically just focus on this part of your clay right here, right? Just get that as close to the middle as you can. And again, like, don't pay any attention to the rim. Even if it was off, it would still work if I just pay attention to the middle right here. Boom, once again, slapped to center. Okay, it's good to go. Let me think what else. Oh, now one thing is, if your rim, in my throwing video for how to make a bowl that you're gonna trim, I talk about how you need to make the rim as flat as possible. That's not what I was talking about. When I was talking about uneven, I mean sort of side to side. If your rim is uneven up and down, it's basically going to be impossible to center your piece, okay? Because what you're going to see is that as it spins, it's going to be rocking back and forth. And there's not a great approach, honestly, to finding center. You just want to get it as close as you can in that case, and then try to use the trim tool to shave it sort of flat so you can maybe work the foot ring into that. Honestly, that's just something you have to learn to fight against and work with when you're trimming on your own work, if that is the case. But ideally, you made the bottom flat, and again, even if the rim is uneven side to side, you can still trim it as long as you get this kind of even side to side. You are good, right? Top to bottom, that wobble, you know, that's very difficult. But anyway, I'm repeating myself. I hope that sort of stuff is helpful. In any case, I've got it to center. That's enough time. Let me do it one more time just for kicks, right? Oh, that's way off center, but look at this. Boom, boom, random, random. Done, centered, good to go. That's what you want, okay? That needle tool method that I showed earlier, very, very reliable. Just got to take your time to do it, and it will work every time. If you just can't get slap to center, that is okay. But I'm telling you, in terms of speed and not getting discouraged, finding center, having to refine center, all that sort of stuff, that's the best way to do it. Now, anyway, let's talk about how you're going to secure this down. So securing this pot down to the bat now that you've found center is very, very important. If you just start carving like this, it's going to fly all over the place. There are methods that other potters will use, like flooding the bat, where essentially there's water just sitting on the bat, and then when they find center, they just push down on the pot, and it creates like a little suction, and that works pretty great if you're not going to trim real aggressively, and if you don't mind your rim getting a little bit softer as you sit and work, and you're going to trim really quick so that it doesn't get too soft, all that sort of stuff. It works, but it's not my favorite, so I don't teach it. And then other people still will, you know, have like a chuck or some sort of, they'll get another bowl that's already perfectly trimmed, and they'll set that down, secure it, and then put their piece that they're trimming on top of that. You know, all these things work, but here's my approach, is the hot dog method is what I like to call it, or, you know, just using clay lugs. I'm just going to grab some clay from the bag, or ideally you're going to use clay that's a little bit on the firmer side than you would typically throw with. I like the clay to be a little bit drier. Not if it's super soft when you go to trim, you know, your piece is just going to slide all over the place and move the lugs. I personally find having it a little drier is just sort of helpful to keep it like secure in place. If your clay is still a little too wet, just roll it in your hands a couple times. Your hands will dry it out. Sometimes I roll it on my pant leg, whatever you need to do. But yeah, we grab a little clay, make a little hot dog. Like I said, just a little link or turd of clay. And I'm gonna hold the bottom of the pot. This is very, very important. With my left hand, I hold it right here and I push the clay downward, right? But it's right up against the bowl, but I'm not pushing into the bowl. I'm pushing it down into the bat and letting it just sort of cinch around it. And then I usually do this little move where I like squish the outside of the clay downward. That is to make sure it's like really stuck on there. Now, if you forget to hold this down with your left hand and you go to push, let me show you what happens, right? I'm gonna just do it on purpose now. Get rid of that because it's gonna not matter anyway, right? We go to do this. Oh, did you see that? The pot moved. Now it is not in any way on center, right? So that is why once you get something center, you should hold it down before you secure it with your hot dog, right? I'm pushing downward into the bat and I'm holding the bowl real firm with my left hand. Then I sort of squish out this lug, okay, or hot dog. And then I'm gonna do 3. You can do 4 if you want. There's not really a need to, but it doesn't hurt, right? I've seen people put hot dogs all the way around their piece. That's fine. You just got to pay attention to one thing is if you want to trim down to the rim, you know, these lugs might kind of get in your way while you're trimming and hit your trim tool. That's not a big deal. It doesn't really matter how big they are as long as they are secure. One more here, and I've got 3 down. Okay, yes. Now, long enough. Oh, I put a little too much space over here. So you know what? I'm going to actually go ahead and do a 4th one. Okay, no reason not to. Just get it good and secure. See, I'm just pushing down, holding it from the top. Boom, squished, held in place. Right, and now the piece is still centered. It is finally ready for me to trim. That's the whole point of this video, is to trim, and I'm just now getting to it. So anyway, yes, we are ready to cut. Now we have various tools we can cut with. My favorite is this one right here. It's called the ribbon tool, the ribbon loop tool. It's got kind of like an egg shape to it, small on one end, large on the other. That's my preferred tool, but you do have others. There's a nice circular tool. I'm not really sure, I haven't used this very much. It might work okay. It's large enough and kind of round enough so you can get some good out of it. Depends on the shape of your foot you want. A lot of students really like to use this trim tool. I personally don't think it's a great idea for beginners. It seems really nice and approachable because they're so small, right? You feel like you're going to be able to control it more. But what ends up happening is because they're so small, you have to take that much longer to trim. You got to spend more time cutting away, and it ends up, you know, more and more likely for you to mess something up. Okay. Yeah, and again, right, catch, knock it off. Right, the longer you take to trim, the more likely you are to knock this off center and have to go back to that first step. And, you know, if you use a needle tool, that takes forever, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I personally just think this one, if you really like it, you can use it, but I get a little concerned when I see students doing it because it takes so long. The only time I might use this is after I've cut most of it with a larger tool and I want to get like a really sharp angle in here on the inside of the foot. I might use this square one to sort of do like a quick move. But yeah, that's up to you. Now, these tools are also pretty solid. You have just like a nice right angle trim tool, or you can use this kind of curvy one. These are more what I would call like in the British style of trim tools, just the angle tools. Some people really like these. I think they're great. You just have to find out the nuances and sort of stuff for yourself, play around, because I'm going to show you with this one. Okay, so I've got it centered. I'm ready to trim. I'm going to start cutting away at the piece, mainly focusing at first on this outer profile, especially here where I've got to cut away finger marks and other stuff and start cutting into that ankle clay. It was like a little you know, too much thicker, you know, to support the walls, all that stuff I've already said. And I like to cut, I trim at about 3 or 4 o'clock on, you know, if this was a clock face, I trim over here, and I keep my left hand on the center of the pot the entire time with a little bit of downward pressure, and my right hand does the trimming. And actually you can see that usually my right and left hand are sort of touching, so I can keep on holding steady a little bit easier. All right, but yeah, I just start shaving away. I'm not trying to do it all at once. I can take my time to trim this, right? We're not trying to cut everything all at once. We're just trying to shave it slowly and clean it up. Now, I don't want to make the foot ring too narrow on a wide bowl, so I'll kind of stop fairly early. I always try to make it at least half of the width of the bowl. You can go narrower if you want, but you got to start worrying about like it tipping over and stuff like that. Another thing, I didn't do this this time because this piece is pretty flat, but I forgot to say, if you are having the problem of once you've got your piece centered and you're ready to start trimming, the top is still kind of rocking back and forth rather than spinning flat like this, you can just real quickly do a little move right here where you shave the top to clean it up. Also, you can use that to make this a little wider if you cut it too slim accidentally. Yeah. Now, notice most of my cutting, I'm using this longer side of the ribbon tool with the pointy end pointed down. That's just kind of my preferred method. That's what I like. But yeah, now, so I've cleaned up the like bottom edge. It's really nice looking. Some people, you know, they call this done, and that's fine if your base is thin enough. But again, we want to throw in that foot ring. So sorry, that was my finger. Oh, that's fun. Anyway, sorry. Okay, now we need to start cutting into the ankles a little bit. So I just start using the back end of the tool, still keeping the pointy end pointed down. I'm just going to start trimming right here into this ankle and removing some of that clay that's extra weight at this point. And once again, you don't have to do this, right? If you like the profile, like kind of a V-shaped pot, a lot of people like that. I think they're pretty cool. I do some of those myself, but for this one, because I left all that clay down there, I want to cut into this ankle. And notice I'm leaving this area projecting straight upward because this is going to become my foot ring, right? And I might, real quickly, leave a little bit of wobble down here, right, to be some fun texture at the top. If I wanted, you know, if I have finger marks or I want to like do some sort of smoothing or cutting down here, I can trim this. But again, pay attention to, you can't really go below where your lugs might hit your piece or your trim tool. So just pay attention to that. Yeah, right about there is about as far as I can go. Okay. That is looking pretty good. Okay, and I pretty much try to finish this whole outer profile totally like done before I move on to cutting the inside. Now, how do you make sure you don't cut through this? My best advice is lots and lots of practice. When you make the bowls that you're going to trim, I always say make lots and lots of extra because you're going to learn how to trim by cutting through your pieces oftentimes. Okay, now there's a few methods I've learned through the years and heard, and I don't know if they always work, but one that you can use is tapping to sort of see, you know, obviously, hopefully you felt and sort of got an idea for how thick this is, but if you need to check it again, you can do the tapping method. And what you want, if you listen, this still has a nice like thump thump, like nice like solid sound to it, right? You can hear that it's clay. It's not super hollow sounding. If you're tapping and you start hearing like a drum sound, right? Like it sounds like woo, woo, like hollow in some way. I can't really imitate it, but yeah, if you're tapping and it sounds like a drum, that means you're making it very, very thin, almost like a drum head or something, I guess is sort of how I would describe it. And you need to stop trimming because you're about to trim through. And then the only other way to know is when you start to see empty air, you know, a hole through the side of your pot. That's how you know. Sorry, I need a little water. I talk too fast in these videos, but they'd be even longer if I didn't. So anyway, okay, we are ready now. Put a little spiral to the foot ring, but we're ready to start cutting the inside of this. Now, I have a couple tips for this as well, of course. So a lot of students have this idea that they're going to start right in the middle and move outward, but there's two problems with this. One, that requires you to let your finger, your left hand, off of the middle when you're cutting. You're gonna have to do that at some point, but if you do it too soon, right, you're just increasing the chance that you are gonna like knock this off center or have it move under you. So you wanna keep this here as long as you can. And then the other thing is, if you start in the middle and trim outward, it's very, very likely that you're gonna get in a groove and get going, and then whoop, you're just gonna go out and cut away your foot ring. And that's not gonna be great. So, how do I recommend starting? You want to start from the outside and go inward. Okay, so how does that work? I leave my left hand here in the middle to hold it down secure. I use the pointy end of my tool to start to carve out what I'm going to say is the maximum width of the inside of my foot ring. Look at that. Boom. Cool. I've already got that done. And then I'm going to just work away this clay. I liken this to, you know, when you're like in like third grade, right, and you have that realization on your coloring books, maybe that's late, I don't know, maybe you learned it earlier. But anyway, you have that realization that when you're coloring things in your coloring book, if you take your drawing utensil and you outline the shape, right, with a nice solid kind of ring of color, and then work inside. You can kind of just go ham. You can go crazy filling in the inside of that shape in your coloring book because you've already got this guideline that keeps you from going out. Same thing here, right? We've defined the outer edge of what we're going to cut, right? That inside edge, I guess I would say, not outer, inside edge. And now we can just go ham, kind of, sort of, not really totally ham, but you can go pretty crazy cutting this way, and you're not likely to draw outside the lines or cut your foot ring off. So in any case, that's my fun analogy for this. But now I start cutting away, and I'm gonna start moving towards the middle. Now, as I said, at some point, you're gonna have to lift up that left hand that's holding this middle part down. And you just want to try to keep it secure, right? Don't go crazy cutting too much. This is an area where you really want to go slow. Don't cut too much because you're very likely to pick up the pot and sort of lift it off of your lugs that you've got, right? So you want to avoid that. Yeah, and just cut away. And then I'll go back to the outside, sort of slip my finger back there to that middle area. And then I'm going to cut the foot like a little more precisely here using the outer edge. Right, I kind of did flip the tool there, but for the most part, I'm still just holding the tool the same way, pointy end going outward. Okay, doing that undercut right there. Look at that, that's looking pretty good. I like a nice round foot, right? You can make it angular, you can make it round, whatever you want to do. But yeah, we're cutting away, and now we're pretty much done, but let me give you a few more tips, of course, for how I do this. One thing I will say, if I can make this make sense. So a lot of students, when they're cutting their foot ring, they cut in and they make it sort of scoop downward, and they make it, it's very concave the way that they press in, right? And they curve, and their foot ring will look something like this. The problem with that, me personally, what I always point out is that if you do that, right, and this is moving down this way, the inside of the pot is also moving up this way. And what you're gonna get is a thin spot right in the middle, right? Where you cut like this and the inside's like this, you're gonna get a really paper thin spot where those two kind of peaks get close together. So what I recommend is if hopefully you can see in this video, I have the trim interior, right? This interior part of the foot ring sort of coming towards me. Right? I don't know if you'd call that convex, but yeah, it's coming towards me. And I almost pretend it's like I've got this shape right here. It comes up, and then I imagine it would just continue. Like it's perfectly round, and I happen to pop a ring onto it, right? So it goes, and the peak is here. It's not sunken right here, okay? That's what we want ideally. Now, if you've left enough clay, you can get away with the whole like interior trim. Some people do like that sort of look. But I personally think you're running a little risk, and I also just like the look of it kind of having like a dome shape here in the middle. So that's what you want. You don't want to go too thin on it, right? And you can also do like fun little spiral on the inside. I even like to do a chatter. I'll go from the inside out right here for this. Oh, look at that. It looks like a conch shell, or I don't know, something like that. You can carve away. If you've got enough clay, you can play around. But yeah, I'm going to smooth it out now. Actually, I didn't love the way that looked, but hopefully not too thin. It is getting a little drummy sounding, so I'm not going to go crazy. But yeah, there you go. It's not perfect. It's a little choppy now because I went back on my spiral choppy look. Okay, but it's looking pretty clean. I like it. Now, one thing I did want to add in there, because of the fact that you want this to be sort of poking up as a dome shape, something you want to do before you call it done is lean over here and look and be sure that this point does not stick out higher than your foot ring right now, okay? Be sure that it disappears below it well before you're looking level here, like that. This is lower than these. If this is higher than these, right, you've cut away at your foot ring for whatever reason, and this is higher, you'll have basically a top, right? Or a spinner, as we like to call them in the business. Yeah, don't do that, okay? You want this lower, but you also don't want to trim through. So keep messing with it, keep playing. I'm gonna go one more good spiral, hopefully not go through it. I still go through pots all the time. It is the way that you learn how to do this. Be sure when you're blowing the trimmings out, you don't just, snort them up your nose or whatever, man. Whoop. Okay. So that is done. I also like, one thing I didn't say, besides your trim tools, right, and the clay that you're gonna use as lugs, I think it is also good to have a sponge and a little bit of water, right? You're not really gonna be doing a lot of throwing or anything like that. But if you have like a little notch or a finger mark or something that you want to get rid of, or for me personally, I like to, on this bottom edge, sort of soften it up, make sure it doesn't show too much of the trim tool. This is where I'm at right now. I like smoothing this out. Yeah, I like to have a little bit of water in this sponge. Now you don't want to do that if your piece is bone dry, obviously, but yeah, and then I like to do my little maneuvers, right? This is pretty good, right? And then this is the place where you might want to cut into here, or I don't know, you can actually use a wire or like a trim tool if you can to sort of cut out like sections of this, so then you have like 2 or 3 like feet sticking out. I don't know, you can just play with it, do what you want. But yeah, here, this is a nice successful foot ring. Got a dome. Like I said, I imagine this piece is like a dome, the whole bowl with a ring pop down on it. Let's see what else. I think I've talked enough about some of the other pitfalls. And just remember, yeah, if you knock it off center during trimming, you got to take these lugs off and recenter it, and it is okay. You just got to be patient. Have extras for when you go through. Notice I didn't say if, I said when you go through. Okay, now I'm done here. I'm checking this. If you wanted, you could, if you're very careful at this point, sort of set this back center. And if you hold this down tight enough right here, you might be able to clean up this rim with your trim tool just a little bit. I'm not going to do that because mine's pretty solid. What I'm going to do actually is, again, take that little bit of water in my sponge and just smooth out. Well, really, it's almost like I'm roughing up again, where the bat, you know, compress this rim a little bit. I'm going to wipe off any stray stuff that the lugs left. Boom. And then this is also a good place for carving or stamping your name in. You guys don't have stamps probably, but you can always make one, or just, yeah, good time for cutting your name in. Boop. And now you're done. You got a nice trimmed foot ring in the bottom of your piece. Good to go. Hopefully this video provided you with enough information about how to do this process. And you can look at other supplemental options. Look at that Lisa Hammond, like hand carved one, however you want to do this. But yeah, there you go. That's my example. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to the next video. Thanks.